My recommendation to everybody is don't fall asleep or you'll miss the meeting tonight. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Municipality of Anchorage. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Dean? Here. Mr. Ferguson?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Strike?
Here.
Ms. Barker? Here. Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays?
Here.
Mr. Kange?
Present.
Thank you.
There are no minutes for tonight. Mr. Strike, will you please handle the disclosures?
Mr. Kange. Any disclosures to
Thank you.
represent?
Through the chair, members of the board, this is my first evening. I wasn't present at any of the prior work sessions. I would entertain a motion to direct me not to participate in this case, or I would recuse myself from this case voluntarily.
I think
So directed.
yeah, I think we can direct that.
Mr. Sporhays.
None. Thanks.
Mr. Spring.
None.
Ms. Dean.
None.
Mr. Ferguson.
None.
Mr. Walker.
None.
Mr. Robinson.
None.
Ms. Dean. Barker.
You mean me? None.
Ms. Barker, I'm sorry. Looking right at you. Is that a no?
Indeed it is.
And I have no disclosures.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strike. Mr. Tyler, or Ms. Robinson, you had the consent agenda, but there's nothing on the consent agenda, so you're excused. Staff, public hearing case 2014-0119 was postponed indefinitely last meeting. Do we have to postpone it again? It's a continuing postponement.
No, you wouldn't need to postpone it. If it was postponed indefinitely last time, I don't know why it appears in the agenda here. Okay, so I stand corrected.
Robinson, will you please make a motion to postpone case 2014-0119 indefinitely?
Yes, sir. I move that we postpone 2014-0119 indefinitely.
Do I have a second?
Second.
My screen stopped. We have a motion and we have a couple seconds. Any objection? That case is postponed indefinitely. That gets us down to case 2014-0111. Question for staff. I understand that there has been communication back and forth between you and the applicant. Would you like to bring us up to speed, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Planning Department met with the petitioner, and we had a really positive, useful meeting, and we brought some new information to the table, the shadow analysis.
Just 1 second, please. Mr. Kange, would you excuse yourself? Thank you. Go ahead, staff.
So the result of the meeting was we agreed to a different wording for the special limitation. So the purpose of a special limitation was to protect the single-family houses to the north and to the east from shadowing, and we think that we've done that sufficiently with a special limitation that the petitioner has agreed to. We're confident with. The wording is on page 1 of in a staff memo that was emailed to you on Friday and has been laid on the table. There's a typo in the word "and" on the third line, so you could strike the word "and." But this is the wording that we've agreed to. Be happy to answer any other questions. Also, the petitioner's here if you had questions or any other thing that you'd like to do.
Commissioner Spring?
Oh, yes, through the chair. I think I like this solution a little bit better, I think, in that I can figure out what the setback is, and it's a lot easier than the shadowing, which is really hard to know how much protection the neighborhood was actually getting. But I would like you to explain maybe how you came up with this particular setback, 20-foot max with 30-foot height on the northern property line.
So my understanding is essentially we looked at the shadow analysis and thought that the commission really wasn't comfortable with that wording for the shadow analysis. So we came up with language that gave a hard, very prescriptive setback and building height in the hopes that that would be more agreeable to the commission.
Through the chair, yes, I agree that that's a good methodology. I'm just wondering how you arrived at this particular set of figures.
Well, we looked at the architectural shadow analysis that the petitioner had prepared and saw that with buildings set back 20 feet and building heights limited in this way, the shadowing was not likely to affect the buildable area and those properties to the north for, there would be sunlight for 6 hours out of the day.
Okay, so you basically took the old special limitation, calculated what it would be, and set that in specific figures then?
That's correct, sir.
And was that based on the language in the original special limitations regarding the buildable area, or is it?
It was.
The buildable, which is the 10-foot setback from the property line, adjacent property line?
Yes, sir, exactly.
So the shadow then of a 30-foot building in the Equinox would not be more than 30 feet?
Through the chair, well, we didn't have exactly perfect information, but based on the information that we had, that's what we planning department feels comfortable. It'll be 6 hours of sunlight granted to those neighbors.
Okay, before I ask, I'm also going to go to the applicant, but Mr. Robinson?
I was just wondering if it had anything to do with the fact that in R2M you have a current height limitation of 30 feet, and so what you'd basically be doing along that north lot line is maintaining status quo. Is that part of the rationale?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Ms. Barker?
Was I correct that in the original petition that the petitioner wanted to build 3-story buildings?
Through the chair, Ms. Barker, that is correct.
So this is an overall change in the number of units planned to be built, or is that density going to be shifted elsewhere on the site?
Through the chair, Ms. Barker, my understanding is that this fit in with the original plan of the developer.
Thank you.
Mr. Strike?
Can we follow up on Ms. Barker's question? Are we going to see a different, I don't know that I recognize that it was fitting in with the original plan. I like it, but I'm not sure her question was fully answered.
Could you repeat that last bit?
And I'm not sure her question was fully answered. I mean, the perception was that there was going to be 3-story, 35-foot height limitations. Now we're seeing 2-story, 30-foot limitations. This doesn't change any aspect of the rest of the plan as presented last week?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, if you want an answer to the question of whether or not this changes the building's architecture in any way, you'll need to ask the petitioner. I can't recall. My understanding was that the original buildings proposed transitioned from 3-story down to 2-story because they're sort of triple wide as well as 3 stories tall. And so the way that the buildings that they've built in other states and other locations, that they were planning on providing a certain setback and a certain building height. This language, my understanding, fit in with their with the buildings that they had proposed, that they have in mind. But I could be wrong, and these guys are saying, oh, actually, we're going to have to lop off something. But I think that what's important to know is that we're only talking about the houses that are within 40 feet of the property line. The rest of the site can still be the R3 height limitation. So, whether or not they have to fine-tune one row of buildings or not.
We'll wait and ask the petitioner.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, on the requested change, it says College Gate East Subdivision. I've looked through the packet and I cannot find a plat map that specifies where the various subdivisions are and their property boundaries of those subdivisions. Is there one in the packet that I can look at? I kind of want to see where College Gate is, because there actually are two north property boundaries since it's an L shape, so I'm just kind of curious. Can you help me on that?
Through the chair, Ms. Dean, there's no identifier for College Gate or Glendon subdivision. I looked it up, and College Gate East is to the northernmost, and Glendon is the eastern. The multifamily subdivision, I can't recall what the name of it is.
So are we going to apply the same thing to that particular subdivision, the other one that is on the other north?
No, you raise a good point. You think you have these things completely figured out. When I searched around in a grid map and clicked on all the properties, I don't believe that the multifamily housing was College Gate East. The property boundary that we're really caring about, that's College Gate East 1 and 2, and then along the east property boundary, it's Glendon subdivision numbers 1, or addition number 1 and addition number 2. So this is the wording that gets us where we want.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, the applicant, this public hearing is closed because there's a change. Would the applicant care to address the proposed change?
Through the chair, my name is Tony Hoffman. I'm with the Boutte Company. And we did work with staff on this, and I can explain, I think, the questions that you're having about, first of all, the orientation of the subdivisions. The eastern boundary is entirely adjacent to Glendon subdivision, addition 1 and 2. The north boundary that we're looking at is immediately adjacent to College Gate 1 and 2. The east and the north are the ones that are going to be affected by the shadow. The southern boundary and that tier of buildings, if you look on page 6 of the new memo, that actually has a little site plan. So we can kind of talk through this. This is our very preliminary site plan, but this is how we arrived at our analysis and our density numbers. So if you look on the south boundary, that boundary is actually going to be affected by the properties to the south because the sun is going to affect us. However, we're not concerned about it. The west boundary along Boniface, the little L shape, the little piece down there, is immediately adjacent to the concrete abutment that is about 50 feet tall, that is Boniface. And the other portion of the property that's on the big piece of the L, I guess, on the left, is adjacent to the 60-foot right-of-way. And there's not going to be any shading impacts to the homes across the way. Now, the questions about how we arrived at the figure on the north, we didn't supply you with the shading analysis that we did on sheet 4. It's a very similar type analysis, but we did it in a different fashion. We did it with the actual physical architectural renderings that have the same type of parameters, latitude and longitude, and the times of the year. And they represented that we were encroaching into the usable yard area, anything between the front and the rear yard setback, with the 30-foot building at 20 feet. That was our decision then, at that time, to redo the renderings that we brought in and discussed with the city and drop it down to 20 feet. So we're a two-story building. Adjacent, which is, when you boil it down, is actually a very reasonable buffer. We're at a two-story building, 20-foot setback. So we feel that that is a reasonable buffer to put between land use types. And we've learned a lot about this new sun shading concept and how it's going to be used in the future. So we all need to get a little more comfortable with it. It's not a simple thing to kind of grasp.
Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, do you know of any other communities in the United States that have this type of attachment to zoning?
Yes, it's all over the United States now.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay. So it's
This is a very common planning guideline now anywhere.
It's got to be very challenging up here because we.
Well, we're just
the
now
sun's
learning it, honestly, you know, and
Yeah.
it's just something, and we're all going to have to get a lot more comfortable with it in the new code. But right now, we're still struggling with this transitional time, of course. But we learned a lot, and you know, I did misunderstand what planning was trying to get at when we first got to it. So, but I think we have a real good limitation on the boundaries now that is hard, and we can plan to it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spring?
Yes, through the chair. I just appreciate you working it through with staff, and I think that's, if it, like you say, it corresponds to the shadow analysis, which in my little rough analysis, it looks like 20 foot will make a 30-foot shadow at, you know,
Right.
noon during equinox, and so it won't, it might just hit the border of the buildable area.
Right.
That'd be it. And I was looking at 30 foot, but
Right, you go 20 and then you back it down. Yeah,
the two-story would work.
Right.
Because it's doubtful you'll have a 30-foot two-story.
Right.
But, so I think that'll work out perfectly, you know.
thank you.
Any commissioners have any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, you may sit down.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. In the matter of case 2014-0111, anyone have any questions for staff on this? Or if not, what's the wish of the body? Ms. Dean?
In the matter of case 2014-0111, Riviera Terrace rezone from R2M to R3, I move to approve with the department recommendation from August 11th laid on the table today.
And that includes the correction on line 3 with the deletion of the word "and"?
I apologize. Which line are you?
On line 3 of the memo E1, staff wanted to delete the word "and," the second word.
Setback and with a maximum height of 2 stories and 30 feet? One of those ands?
Which "and" did you mean to correct, Mr. McLaughlin?
It should read setback with a maximum height of 2 stories
So we're
and 30
deleting
feet.
the first "and." Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Sporhees, we have a second with Mr. Sporhees on that. Any discussions on this motion? Any discussions? Mr. Spring,
I think some findings perhaps would be in order.
that would be appropriate.
I may not have all of them, but a few, I think, in that the rezoning conforms to the newly adopted or newly recommended for adoption East Anchorage District Plan, the land use map, and 2, that the proposed special limitations will adequately protect the surrounding neighborhood, residential neighborhood, from shadow effect of the new development. 3, there is a need for additional housing units as documented in several reports, housing study reports, and this proposed rezoning will probably result in helping to meet that demand, especially near the UMed district.
Ms. Barker?
If it's appropriate, I would also like to add a commendation to the petitioner for their efforts to mitigate the relocation stress on the existing occupants of the mobile home park.
I'd say it's completely appropriate. Any other? Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, I would simply like to add that normally when we have rezonings for higher residential intensities, there's a lot more public interest and public comment. I just would like to mention that I think we had one person comment at the public hearing. She was primarily interested in shadowing effects, and I think the majority of that has been addressed here.
Anything else? The chair would like to recognize the staff and the applicant to working together to resolve a question in this past week. I think the resolution with the two parties working together is better than what the board could come up with. We have a motion. We have no further discussion. Will you please use your machines to vote? That motion is carried on that. If there's nothing else to come before the body,
Yeah, thanks.
Applicant, there is an appeal process printed on the agenda. I have a motion to adjourn by Mr. Strike, seconded by Ms. Dean. Any discussion? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.